For faculty, supporting Capstone multilingual writers. Part 1, Psycho-Affective or Emotional Aspects and Approaches. Researchers Peltridge and Starfield broke down 4 aspects affecting doctoral multilingual writers and what can make writing a capstone study potentially difficult for capstone multilingual students. Peltridge and Starfield's 2007 analysis of 4 aspects affecting doctoral multilingual writers include psychoaffective/emotional aspects, behavioral aspects, social aspects, and rhetorical aspects. In this short video, part 1 of 4, I'm going to focus on the first aspect, psychoaffective/emotional aspects and approaches. In terms of psychoaffective/emotional aspects, the first one I wanted to mention here is what we call imposter syndrome. This is not unique to multilingual writers, but this issue might be amplified for them because of a different language and/or a different culture. This is when students feel like an imposter rather than a real researcher or scholar or expert in their field. Basically, doctoral multilingual writers may have been used to being a student, not an expert in the field, and they may not feel like they have an equal seat at the table. Researchers Rogers et al. Found results of this as well. Several multilingual focus group students that they interviewed described reluctance to ask for help from either committees or from their peers for fear of seeming that they did not belong in the program or in the group. Another psychoaffective/emotional aspect that researchers Peltridge and Starfield mentioned is anxiety about potential failure. This could lead to writer's block, or conversely, to the desire to write the perfect document on the very first draft. An aspect related to the bullet point above is a lack of confidence. Rogers et al. Found that many multilingual doctoral students lacked confidence in their knowledge of standards for dissertation writing and were unfamiliar with the expectations of researching and writing at this level. Finally, a fourth aspect, which is almost opposite from the ones above, is students might assume that their level of English is acceptable because they were accepted into their program of study. Students may not realize the differences and the time it takes to develop academic English. Another aspect in this category that I think is worth mentioning is fear of the committee or fear of the committee's feedback. Breaking this down a bit, there could be uncertainties about the level of formality with the committee. Should the student use first names, last names, titles such as Dr. or Mr. or Mrs.? Another difference worth mentioning is cultural differences. And more specifically, there could be cultural differences, for instance, in the meaning of pauses. So, for example, if you are meeting online or on the phone with a student, does a pause in the conversation mean that it's the other person's turn to speak? Or does it mean that the person speaking is silent because they disagree? Depending on the student's culture, it could be either one. There could also be cultural differences in the approach to asking questions and to contacting the committee. In some cultures, asking questions about what you don't understand is not encouraged. In the US, we expect students to ask, but multilingual doctoral students might not be aware of this difference. In addition, there may be cultural differences in understanding indirect feedback. For example, you might write a comment saying, "Can you develop this idea further?" And the student may think, "Yes, I can, but you didn't ask me to do so, so I won't." The last point on this slide is that there could be cultural differences in the quantity of feedback that the student receives from you. In some cultures, feedback is not received until the final draft. Finally, there could be differences in the autonomy required in the writing process of a capstone study at an American university, and the writer may not understand how to be successful in this environment. So, how can we help capstone multilingual writers with this? First, I recommend scheduling regular meetings with students to keep in touch and to keep on track. In Rogers et al.'s study, students ranked one-on-one conversations with advisors and committees as the most helpful support to write a capstone study. Also, I recommend aiming to give clear, comprehensible, constructive, and actionable feedback. Rogers et al. Found that there's often student frustration with what students believe to be cryptic advice. Therefore, it's important to be as explicit as possible. So rather than saying something like, "Can you develop this idea further?" Maybe say something like, please continue to elaborate on this idea and further develop it. The third suggestion here is to discuss written feedback to make sure that it is understood by the student. Students in Roger et al.'s study ranked written feedback as the second most helpful support to write a capstone study. The last bullet point on the slide is to explain specific terms you use when communicating with the student to develop a common language. For instance, if you use abbreviations for terms, be sure the writer knows what these mean. If you use highlighting in feedback, make sure the writer knows what this signifies. The next slide contains 3 more approaches to help overcome psychoaffective/emotional aspects for the doctoral multilingual writer. The first one here is to encourage a climate where the student can ask questions about your feedback. Again, this goes back to being as explicit as possible in the feedback you give. In addition, it can be really helpful to allow the student to record conversations if they're having difficulty understanding your accent, your intonation, and your general speech patterns. Then they can go back to the recording on their own to listen again or for clarification. And I suggest referring students to resources throughout the Office of Research and Doctoral Services and the OASIS websites. The Office of Research and Doctoral Services website hosts more specific doctoral capstone and project resources. OASIS has library databases and tools such as APA resources and Grammarly that might be particularly helpful. For more support, I suggest visiting and bookmarking the Faculty Support for Working with Capstone Multilingual Writers page, located on the Office of Research and Doctoral Services website under the Form and Style resources. I've included the URL on this slide. This page contains information on Capstone Multilingual student writing support resources that you can share with your students. There's also a series of SMART guides, which are PDF how-to guides for faculty supporting Capstone Multilingual writers. In addition, there are other videos like this one on different aspects of supporting Capstone Multilingual writers. This final slide contains the full references for the research I referenced in this video. This was part 1 of 4, breaking down Peltridge and Starfield's analysis of 4 aspects affecting doctoral multilingual writers. I hope you find this information helpful as you continue to support Capstone Multilingual writers here at Walden.